So we have Travis Woodland, the Director of Innovation and Intellectual Property at Portland State University. Thanks for being here, Travis. And can you just tell us just kind of philosophically, like what are you trying to accomplish in your office?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. I'm always happy to talk about innovations at PSU. As at the core, we're really focused on a couple of high level things in the office that really drive, the mission of the university. PSU's, campus motto is "Let knowledge serve the city," and we really over the years, the decades, have kind of broadened that to the greater Portland metro region and whenever possible outside of that. And so a lot of the work that we do is really enabling faculty to get their work out of the lab, out of the building they're in, and do something outside the walls. My office is focused on intellectual property, and a lot of people think of IP, they think of patents and startups, and we do a lot of that. We certainly have a lot of folks, working in chemistry and engineering and other sciences. And we do find really good projects, at least 5 to 10 every year that we put some IP around. Often that's a patent. And then, we work with that faculty member on trying to find the best way forward. And very often, it's a choice between a startup company or partnering with industry. We go local whenever possible, but, innovation happens all over the world. And so we do work with companies that have presence outside Portland. Um, and then, we're maybe a bit of a strange university. I think it's more common now than it used to be.
Mhm.
But we have a strong copyright portfolio as well. And a lot of that work that our faculty are doing, a lot of it comes out of social sciences and education. It's really impactful work on a very short-term basis. So when you think about a patent, and all that process, and then putting all the resources into a startup and spending years trying to do either a collaboration or build something from scratch, that's a very long lead time before you really see a product or a service. These copyright programs, enable us, to immediately engage with government agencies, nonprofits, other people who are looking for solutions that are, helping at-risk youth, that are helping people who need healthcare training, and have a lot of other problems that we can help them out with. And we do that through a licensing process that gets them immediate access to some of the best materials in the field, but then also gets them access to the faculty and the centers that help create those. And so you can see an immediate impact on a large population with that program.
Yeah, and when you say copyright materials, would that be like a curriculum, like for a counseling situation? It could be maybe some testing. What would the product look like?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we have a few things that are more curriculum based, and so partnership with companies that have incorporated that into their scholastic offerings. We have a couple of instruments that are used for diagnostic testing, essentially finding out if someone's in a bad family situation or is just lacking resources in a school system, or in some cases the juvenile justice system will help them find the resources they need that are local to them as quickly as possible. So that's a combination of an instrument and essentially a matchmaking service where we partner with the agency that's utilizing it. And then there's materials that are more, very specific training for healthcare providers that might be working with youth, folks that are going out and working in schools as a social worker, and essentially, and they have to be trained. Those materials need to be kept up to date to make sure that they're aware of the laws, regulations, and best practices. So especially that youth gets the best possible help they can when they need it the most.
That's great. And what's nice about the copyright protected works making it out there is that spreads innovation all over the campus. So it's not just STEM fields launching things. BYU is a little different in this regard. We actually have a creative works department next door to tech transfer that does the copyright material basically. And then so we separate up there, but that's fantastic. I think, well, a couple things. So Portland, you talked about serving the city. Portland has a reputation as kind of a creative city, creative place to be. What is the atmosphere like there for startups and commercialization?
It's actually really great. So we have a very active community of service providers and entrepreneurial support organizations that we work with. folks like, Tao and OEN, which I know won't mean much to many of your listeners and viewers, but they provide curricular training to folks that are, either launching their first business or looking to grow a business that they've started, maybe into a new product or a new market. We partner with them, and sometimes send our students or our faculty who are thinking about taking that route into their training programs, which is fantastic. At the building that I'm in, we have a larger group called Propel PSU. And so that's a combination of my office that's focused on intellectual property coming out of research at the university.
Mhm.
And then another group called the Center for Entrepreneurship that is primarily undergraduate focused, although in the summer they do programs for high school students and younger. But a lot of their programs during the academic year are focused on PSU students, and then they have a marquee program called Inventor, where they work with all of the colleges and four-year schools in the entire state to do entrepreneurial training, ideation, and then bring everyone together for a final business plan competition with prize money at the end of every year.
Mhm.
We also have the Portland State Business Accelerator, which is co-located in our same building. And that's a fantastic resource because not only do we have some of those service providers there just on site, where you can bump into people in the hallways, but it has a nice collection of startup companies, some of which come out of PSU. In fact, we just had a couple go in this year. And then, some of which are from the community. So you get this nice mix of companies that are really, really early, might need, a lot more mentorship and a lot of help from folks that have been doing that a while. And then companies that have been, sometimes in business for several years and are really happy being in that type of exciting academic environment. The most recent addition to the Propel team is called the Portland Metro Hub, and that is a group that is responsible for both cataloging and connecting people in the business community to the resources that are available. So it's not necessarily PSU centric, although some of our entrepreneurs do go through their doors and get a lot of help. But they really invite, the broader Portland business community to come work with them. And whether it's someone who's looking for an attorney, is looking for retail space, they need help with accounting or tax advice or whatever it is, they've got this huge network of folks that they can draw on and make connections to so that someone doesn't feel trapped or under resourced. They can very quickly find someone to help them solve their business problems. And so those are all in one spot, which is fantastic. And then, of course, like I said, we have all these connections to the broader network throughout the Portland region.
Mhm. So if from a student's perspective, say you have a student who's very entrepreneurial, they could potentially go to the entrepreneurial center, participate in their competition, like get some support there, and then maybe license a technology from your office, and then have these community resources as well. Is that the sort of thing people try to do?
Close. Yeah. So the student would absolutely be welcome to come to the Center for Entrepreneurship. They would have, access to business mentors, to training. If it was an appropriate project, they might even be getting some prototype funding and be able to take their dreams and try to create a prototype and get feedback on that. But generally, PSU doesn't own student IP, and so we're always happy to give them advice and then make connections to folks if they need to protect that IP. But unless the student's idea came out of like a federally funded research project or something similar, where a lot of campus resources were used, they get to own their IP if they're a paying student, which is great. And there's actually a couple of examples. I might send you the link later
Yeah.
to the Central for Entrepreneurship, and they have several students. It's usually one or two every year that create a legitimate company that goes out and finds resources and starts selling product. We have a really interesting one called Egonaut that is working on a VR type headset for young children who have either social anxiety or other type of sort of interaction, issues at a very young age. And these environments that are, being developed by neuroscientists over at OHSU. So this is an example of a team that came from another university and went through the Center for Entrepreneurship's Inventor program.
Yeah.
Those neuroscientists are, building, they actually have an amazing prototype where a young kid who might be having social anxiety issues can go through a bunch of really fun games, and it'll help train them to have the psychological tools to calm themselves and be able to have more appropriate interactions with people. And they're going to be presenting, hopefully getting funding from investors at the Bend Venture Conference in about a month, actually. And so, it's a legitimate on ramp for folks to come up with something that there's a market need for.
Oh, that's great. So we're like here, we kind of handle things the same way. So that maybe it's a Venn diagram where there's the entrepreneurship center and there's tech transfer. And if we license to a student, they should go to the entrepreneurship center, but not all of theirs come here, that sort of situation, right?
Yeah, and we do have students who, do have a project that's coming out of university research,
Mhm.
or otherwise, leveraged a lot of resources, and it's something where they might actually assign their IP to PSU and then we license it to them. It's not necessarily an either or; it's very
Yeah.
circumstantial dependent. But they'd be welcome to go to that Center for Entrepreneurship in either case.
Mhm.
If it's university owned IP, we actually have other resources we can offer to licensed to companies that have licensed IP. We have the University Venture Development Fund, which is a donor-funded grant program that a lot of our startups use as their first source of seed funding. And so, we'll get them, a small amount of funding that they can use, often while they're living at the business accelerator, when they're filing for SBAR grants, doing business plan competitions, and all the other things they need to do to get to a VC investable state.
That's fantastic. Well, good. And I'm thinking of patented technologies. I know many of the Oregon schools have agriculture, like actual seed patents is a strong point. What do you see as like for PSU? What are some strong points for patenting?
Yeah, I think our two biggest by far are some biotech areas. And then I think I'd mentioned, when we were talking earlier, the video compression technologies.
Yeah.
And so even though we're not a medical school, we're very closely located with OHSU, and we have a lot of faculty who are either dual appointed or have very strong partnerships with OHSU. And so they have the ability to do, clinical trial data. They can do mouse models, and take those steps that you need to really get pharmaceutical companies interested when you've got, say, a new cancer target or a biomarker that you're trying to, create a critical mass of data around. And so in our chemistry department, we have several folks that are working on glucose detection that's non-invasive. We have a group that's working on a malaria drug that looks very, very promising and is already through a lot of data. I think we're going to have monkey data here pretty quick, so it's already really far along, and that's exciting. And we have folks that are working on different types of cancer detection. All coming out of a relatively small but very, very active chemistry department. On the other side, in our engineering school, we have this group that's got a really critical, and I think one of the best, by some measures, the best in the world of doing AI-based video compression technology. And so, they've got, this very large patent pool, in all the countries that we think we need to have it in order to create a portfolio that's investable for external partners. And the short version is, if you're using a phone or a streaming box on your TV, they can give you an equivalent quality video using half the bandwidth that you're using right now. And since I think it's something like 70 to 80% of the internet is clogged with video streaming of various types, being able to cut that bandwidth in half, either to reduce costs or just open up more space for other applications, that has a lot of ramifications, and especially for mobile networks like cell phone, and those types of things. If you're trying to, invest fewer and fewer towers or not have to create quite so much bandwidth in order to serve your customers, that's a huge savings, let alone quality of service just for the end user could be, greatly improved.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm in the software area. I think that's super interesting. The biotech things you mentioned, those are kind of like if you can solve malaria or detect it earlier or whatever, like those are kind of save the world sort of solutions. And what's interesting is here we've had the same sort of experience where we don't currently have a medical school. We will have in a couple of years probably, but same thing. Our chemistry department has been working on the problems like that. And anyway, really great to see. So so I know you also teach a new venture management class. So tell us a little bit about that. Like what are the main things you teach, or how do you help ventures know what to do?
Yeah, so this is an interesting class. It's a collaboration with our engineering technology management program, which teaches classes for students that have an engineering background, but
Mhm.
they really want to look at the business side of things. And so, you look at a lot of their projects and they're producing, waterfall diagrams, and they're producing, project management plans, to take a product from an idea to an actual sellable product from within an organization. And they learn those processes. So it's in a way, it's kind of like a bit of an MBA for an engineering student who's going to go into that product development side of things. But we had this class that was developed about a decade ago, in part with our UVDF funds. Actually, they had some professors that put in a grant for that to create this new curriculum, and it was really about integrating the a lot of the tenets of iCore and customer discovery and trying to create a business model canvas, and have someone be very very critical of the business plan that you were putting forward for a new technology in order to refine that and make it better and better. And so this class, went on for a couple of years, and then it kind of went cold. They stopped teaching it. I think one of the professors left, and we thought, we've got these new capabilities with artificial intelligence to really take a lot of the initial burden off those students. So I don't know how many iCore classes you've been associated with or business model canvas, but in my experience, if you've got a 10-week term, the first 6 weeks are just the students trying to wrap their head around that early data, and then all of the work happens in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And
Mhm.
you really lose out on the overall opportunity to build a really robust business model canvas. And so we thought, PSU has access to a lot of Gemini tools. I use a couple of proprietary programs. Why don't we give the students access to that, give them some real disclosures from our disclosure pool, and have them, do that research using the AI as their initial sounding board, as the expert that can search reports and distill that information into something that the students can then create a cohesive business model canvas. And if this term ends up being sort of the bar, in about 20% of the time it would normally take for them to create one that actually looks credible, and then spend the rest of the class actually refining that by talking to people in industry, talking to experts, working with the PIs. And I think the results after we've taken the steps that they recommended will probably speak for themselves, but it's early days.
Okay. Yeah, and if anyone doesn't know, so I-Corps is the federal government, is it NIH, I think, the federal government's program for training
NSF and
SF?
NIH, yeah.
Okay, both of
Yep.
them. But and those are going to be the big sources of grants for researchers at universities. And they run them through this course, like you said, 10 weeks, and it forces them to talk to, I think it's 100 people about their
Yep.
product, about their idea. And so that's focused mainly on faculty and maybe some grad students. But your classes, I assume, undergrads, or is it grad students?
It's graduate students.
Okay.
Yeah. I've found over the years that, undergraduate students really enjoy taking the classes, but the graduate students have a lot more technical knowledge. And
Yeah.
so it's much easier for them to, understand early stage research and then take those business related steps. It's a lot more difficult, especially when you're on a term system where you have 8-week terms at PSU to have an undergraduate class go through that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And for engineering, it makes a lot of sense. Our engineering students, especially grad students, want to create things that make it into the marketplace. So ideal to teach them. Do you see classes like that happening in other disciplines, like over in life sciences or other areas?
Well, we pulled from all of the science and engineering colleges for this
Okay.
class, but the class this time was primarily ETM students. I think in the future iteration, we're going to pull grad students, the ones that are working on the projects, and then maybe some others that are interested in this business side of science, and have a much broader constituency in our class. That's my hope. But we just rebooted this, and now
Mhm.
we're looking for the next iteration on it.
Okay, super smart. Like I totally agree. Grad students are a great segment to go after, and they generally want to learn about business. It's just you can only study one thing at a time, right? So you mentioned some AI tools you use in tech commercialization. What tools do you like to use? What are your go-tos?
So we have two things that I utilize more than any other. One of them is a commercial product called First Ignite. It's very good for initial review of something, especially if you're not very familiar with the subject matter. And so, one of the greatest thing about, for me, the greatest thing about working in a tech transfer office is that you get access to all of these experts that are, at the top of their field, and they're so innovative, but it also means that you have to be a quick study in a lot of things in order to have reasonable feedback for these scientists. And so the programs like First Ignite are really good at doing an initial pass on, a potential market, looking at uses that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise thought about without a lot of work. And so you can essentially shorten, what might be a 4 or 8 week process of doing research and distilling all that information into, reading a report that comes out after just 20 or 30 minutes of waiting. And so it's a really good starting point. Um,
And I should note, we do for the past, let's see, are we a year into it? For the past few months at least, we've used First Ignite as well. And same experience. It just makes a lot of things really easier, outreach as well. So yeah.
yeah, we're building some internal tools though, one of which I'm really excited about. PSU is I don't know if Google School is an official designation, but the majority of our infrastructure is built on Google stuff. So we have Google Drive and all the docs and everything as sort of a core part of our IT. And we've recently added the higher level Gemini Pro, and all those other types of AI
Cool.
LLM tools. And because of the way we have the data and the workflow structured, we can put proprietary information into it without
Sure.
worrying about it getting into the general LLM system. So we've been building some tools in my office to help researchers do similar type of, first take on an idea, put in an abstract, and it will give you a really quick report that says, maybe you could use it for X, Y, and Z, and this industry would be relevant, and here's some potential funding sources and that sort of thing. I'm working with a colleague on having a chatbot based version of our invention disclosure, where
Mhm.
we
Oh,
could
nice.
take some information in, help build a scaffolding disclosure that, we hope, fingers crossed, we'll be able to immediately transpose into our official form so there's no repeat of info.
Yeah.
But that'll give a faculty member or a student the ability to sign into that using their university account, put some information in that they, can trust is going to remain private, whether it's a proposal they're working on or just an idea they've written up, get a little bit of feedback, and we can get a copy of that and then reach out to them. And it'll be another way to engage with those innovators in a way that might be easier for them on their own time. And then we can reach out to them if we find something interesting in their back and forth with the chatbot.
That's super interesting. I haven't heard of anyone else doing that. Really smart. And yeah, I've always, so invention disclosures are a bottleneck for tech transfer, and it's just not fun to fill out a form. Like it's hard to get excited about going and doing that. So if you could chat instead, that's great. We've used on our website, just as of this last week, we have a chat bot for looking for technology. So facing the other direction. So hopefully that makes it easier for entrepreneurs. But that great idea. I love that. So well, good. Well, so we have just a few more minutes here, but what are some myths about tech transfer? What do people not understand about us that they should?
Yeah, I think, one of the battles that we always have is people immediately assuming that it's all about the money, or the
Right.
ROI. We really try to position intellectual property as a tool, rather than an asset. I mean, at the end of the day, when you get to the transaction stage of things, the other party is going to care about the quality of the asset for sure.
Yeah.
But I think, the majority of university research is really, really early. We don't do that much applied science until you're in that partnership stage.
Mm.
And so viewing IP as a tool to bring resources to your project, I think is the better way to frame that. And we hammer that, at our faculty as much as possible, try to train them to think in that way, that if we take an idea, make sure we protect it in a really thoughtful way, it'll be a way to engage with industry. It might be a way to engage with donors. It'll be a way to, really plant a different kind of flag, in your idea than the publication. Eventually, you'll have both. So you'll have the scholarship side, in addition to all of these other opportunities to engage with people. And there's a lot of really early ideas that need financial resources and or partnership in order to be successful. And so it's not necessarily that we're trying to, own an idea in a particular way. It's to turn it into a tool to bring more resources to the innovator.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like in the history of tech transfer, maybe in the 80s or 90s when this industry was just ramping up, I think people had the idea that universities noticed they had these assets and we don't want to lose the assets, grab onto these things. But wouldn't you say at this point, people like you and me, like anyone in the industry, it's not that anymore. It's more like a opportunity creation, more like let's not waste the thing that's in the academic publication, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is always something to be said for pure creation of knowledge. That is a public good.
Yes.
It's one of the large portions of our tax dollars go into funding that in various ways, and that's really important. But a lot of ideas, in order to be successful, require investment after their creation, and one of the best ways to do that is to protect it, and then engage with parties in the right way, whether that's an investor or creating your own startup. I mean, you always have the option of giving it away to the public after you've filed the patent. If for some reason you find out later that, maybe the IP route wasn't the best idea, but the other direction doesn't exist. And so thinking about protecting it and then doing so if you think it's a good idea is the better option because you can't go back in time.
Yeah, totally true. And yeah, for whatever reason, that's just the way it's set up. And yeah, so we have to be diligent on those things. I think, is it fair to say most faculty members want to get the IP right? They're just thinking about a million different things, so we have to be there helping them out, reminding them, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really is just a matter of education. I mean, most faculty members have a lot of pressures on them, whether it's teaching, research, some kind of service, and a million other things that I probably still don't appreciate after years working at university.
Right.
And so it's really about trying to meet them where they're at, do some education, and then, at some point, hopefully have some proof, some results that you can come back to them with so that, you create that trust and then they want to come back to you to the next project. Most of our really good innovations are repeat customers. They're serial innovators. The first one is almost always the hardest, but after that, they're a lot more willing to, engage and be proactive because they really do see the value.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, good. Well, I think we're out of time, but Travis, thanks for taking the time today. Fantastic to hear what you're doing at PSU, and sounds like a really exciting place to be.
It is. It's fantastic. If you're down in Portland, shoot me a note. We'll get some coffee. We'll hang out.
Awesome.
All
Awesome.
right. Thanks, Dave.
Appreciate
Have a great day.
it. Yeah, take care. Okay, good.